Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Haas Talks Boss. I'm the Haas, head of open source strategy at Percona, Matt Yonkovit. Today, I'm here with David Duncan. Hi, David. How are you doing?
Hi. Yeah. Hey, Matt. How are you? Doing
Now,
great.
David, you work for AWS as it's as is it a partner architect or a solution architect or a solution partner architect?
Called a partner solutions architect. And I spend a lot of my time working with our operating system partners. So my job is specifically platform related. It's not the application layers, right? Most for the most part.
Okay. And so, tell us a little bit about what you do there. From a day to day perspective, what does that mean?
Well, it means that I'm looking at a lot of our Linux partners. I mean, for the most part, and how they fit into the structure of our strategy, and what we can do to create a better experience for customers who need to use something that is not provided by AWS directly, right? So that would be Red Hat, working with Red Hat Enterprise Linux, or supporting Oracle Linux or Rocky Linux or any of these guys that have come along, and then that does, it's not just limited to Linux. I also work with Unix partners like the FreeBSD
Okay.
Foundation, and really have a great time working with them. By the way, that's always a pleasure.
So you're helping them get their OSs onto AWS.
Yeah, and to take advantage of things that you wouldn't, that we want them to be able to take advantage of, like the AMI public parameters, right? We provide a public parameter to allow you to find the latest machine image from a project, and that's part of my job is to help them onboard with those programs and make sure that the right accounts are there and the structure is right so that everyone can find what they're looking for and they feel comfortable that it's official, not it's not just some randomly published machine image, right? So making sure that everything gets in there is in a way that is predictable and safe for use.
So everybody who's using one of the official, AMIs or the official, packages out there for one of these Linux distributions, it has your fingerprints on it.
If you launched it from the console, and it's not Amazon Linux, I I was the one who put it in the put the listing together for that for it,
And so you're
and
helping
do a
them
lot
work
of
through
work
the
with this.
issues, get things moving. You're doing a little
Yeah,
bit of everything.
yeah, and having a great time doing it. Right, these are my people. This is my tribe. Right, so I'm excited every day that I get to go to work and to do the work around and making sure that the right parts of the kernel or the right patches that have been introduced to mainline are getting into the right spot. So when the next generation of Graviton comes up, there'll be 0 day support for Red Hat, and there'll be 0 day support for SUSE and for Ubuntu, and all these other operating systems that are out there that we partner with.
Very cool. Very cool. And how did you get into this? Like, what does your career look like to get you to this point?
I mean, so it's funny because I mean, usually I like to tell the shocking story right first, which is that I got my first job in computing, basically because I was working on a database. I was working on a back end connection to an ISAM database that was in a point of sale system at a fish store, at a little aquarium store, where I was working just minimum wage aquarium clerk, and I called. It's just looking online, trying to get the connection to our web store to work, just noodling around, and then uh, called in the consulting company that because I couldn't get the ISAM database right, buckets and all working the way that I expected to in the inventory evaluation. And I called them in and I said, look, I need somebody to help me with how these buckets work in the accounting. And they said, great. They sent an accountant out. I explained for about a half an hour to her what I was trying to do. She said, hold on a minute. I'll be right back. She stepped outside, came back inside, and she said, I talked to my boss, and he said he has no idea what you just did, but do you want a job? And that's really how I got my start, right? Before that, I was trying to do everything but computing. My dad did computing work for NASA. My mom was a database administrator on PDP-11 and VAX. And so I got to see a lot of that. My first computer was a Sinclair ZX80, right, that I built from a kit. And just, first big computer program was random character generator for Dungeons and Dragons. I'm that kid, right? And and so it just kind of budded from there. I got excited about it. Then I got hired to do this point of sale stuff. I had been to college I went to a great book school, but had been to school where we did a lot of physics and a lot of math. And so when the call came up for someone to do work on Beowulf projects, I was ready to do some installations, ready to talk about doing science. And I'd already been humbled enough to know that I wasn't a scientist, but I was a really good janitor for scientists. And this Linux thing was really firing up with the high performance computing. And I just happened to be at Dell at the right time and have some great mentors inside of this space. People that you might not, your viewers might not know, but Garima Kochar, who was a performance engineer at Dell, who really mentored me in what it was like to do, community science together. And funny stories like that. Those are kind of I guess that's how I got my start, and what made me love Linux so much is that I just got so directly connected into that world in a quick and easy fashion.
Yeah, I think a lot of people started there, right? With like the, hey, I'm trying to do this fun thing or this funny thing, and it just kind of evolves from one thing to the next, and then you end up in the right place at the right time. I mean, my entire career started that way. I worked at an internet service provider back when there was dial-up modems, and they did websites in the early days of websites. And after a year there, they like to take the kids who were in college and see what they wanted to do career-wise. And I remember the head of engineering dude came over and he's like, "Okay, so what do you want to do?" And I didn't know. So I actually looked in the newspaper to find what jobs paid a lot of money in the IT space. And I found DBAs did. And I go, I think I want to be a DBA because it paid the most money. And then he's like, "We need one of those. You're it." And then that was it. Right. And so then, 25 years later, here I am. But it's always fun how these little things start, right? You just never know how things are going to evolve when you get started and when you make some of these early decisions.
Right, exactly. You just never know. And then my dad used to say, luck is where preparation meets opportunity. That the right answer here was that I was messing around until I had a fairly good idea of what it was that I wanted to do, but then convince some other people that I could commit and I could deliver, and then the rest is history, sort of. But there are some great moments too, like working on that point of sale system. It's funny. I remember a friend of mine and I won a bid to do an entire college stadium, right? To network and build out the devices for an entire college stadium. And we decided to use the Linux Terminal Services Project, the Linux in Schools project, right? If you're familiar with it. And so we built out this entire configuration. And in the end, there was a database corruption that kept happening. And we didn't understand what was going on. Well, we got this is Chris Tooley, is the friend of mine. He was an administrator at our local museum of art, and he was doing everything at the lowest cost, and I was doing everything at this I could on Linux with this Unix based system that we were working with, and so we just beat our heads against the wall, and I'll never forget this because we got up on IRC. We were on Pound Linux, and we were talking about what was happening to us. And these people, we were using XFS as the basis. We were using Red Hat with the XFS overlay, if you remember those days, on an old PowerEdge server. And we were told by the company, or actually our customer was told by the company that handled the point of sale software, that we were using an experimental file system. And we said, well, it says XFS, but it's not experimental, right? And so they weren't convinced, but we told somebody on Pound Linux what we were experiencing, and then they got David Love, who is one of the architects from SGI, and they said, "Hey, they're telling these kids it's an experimental file system," and he said, "Experimental since 1968." And he and Andrew Tridgell helped us to debug the problem and gave us. I'm making this story much shorter, but we figured out that the people who had written this application were not using proper file open and close on their database files. And it worked fine, with a single system. But once we had this distributed NFS was creating a dirty cache, and the write back was happening on a timeout for XFS, right? So combination XFS and NFS and this program that wasn't properly closing its files, we were getting a deadline right to the database, right? And it was awful. So but the experience we had with the community was that they rallied around us, and these were people who were, famous for us. I mean, they were, I knew who they were, but you would never expect them to help you because you were just some guy, in Texas who was working on a little point of sale system. But no, they helped us to really keep ourselves clear of any blame, free of blame, and to really help our customer understand that we were really doing a great job for them. And it was right there that, I was completely sold. My whole career has been around open source since since that moment that we knew that we were rallied around by a community of people that we could trust. And we try to be those people, or you try to be that kind of citizen inside of this community, right? So,
and I think that speaks so much to the open source community and how welcoming it is. I mean, there are so many people out there who are willing to go to the nth degree to help one another do more. And it's so awesome when you start to see the empowerment that's out there, especially in a lot of the older communities, like the Linux community and some of the more established communities. And I think it's great that the new projects that come out try to learn from the old and try to make things a little better. And here we are, all these years later, and everything is just exploding, right?
Yeah. It is exploding. I mean, I feel like, I think you hear from a lot of the people who have been in open source for a long time. They say we've won, right? Like, now what? We're on top. We've come to a place where everyone has recognized the value of open source, and I think that's true. But I think where we are now is continuing to tell that story in a way that brings us good citizens, right? It's so hard, I think, or it's easy to fall prey to the idea that you could provide a service model and somehow, if you keep all this code to yourself, you can make some money. The real thing is getting those people to recognize that their contribution back is a part of their, is a part of their edification, is a part of their reward, and to see that as something that is a duty, right, a responsibility based on what they've done. And so I spend a lot of time, I think, preaching that message, talking about it, but also living it. You have to be a part of those communities, or these communities, to be um, to 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 help people realize the deep connection and the help that they can get.
No, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, I know there's quite a few out there to participate in. And, I would encourage everyone who's listening, choose one or two that interest you and get involved, right? Contribute something back. And it doesn't have to be code, right?
No.
That's the thing.
Oh, yeah. I can't remember who it was who said this, but in a beautiful way, there are many people out there in the world of the open source who have said things similar. So I'll just say that, like, from the open source universe, documentation is engineering, right? Making sure that everybody can understand and read how to make a software, or how to install and use the software in a successful way is a real engineering talent and shouldn't be forgotten.
Yeah. And, so David, as you've been working more with the Linux vendors, the OS, vendors, I'm sure that, there's now a very different ecosystem today than there was even 5 years ago, with not only the number of distributions, but also the number of technologies and ways people deploy their apps, right? So now we've got Kubernetes, we've got, serverless systems. We've got, so how has that changed your work?
Significantly. Of course, first off, part of what I did all of last year was to work on the architecture for the Red Hat OpenShift on AWS service, the ROSA service. So I spent a ton of time working with the Red Hat SREs and the engineering teams at Red Hat to build out OpenShift on AWS as a service team, right? Really, and as a tier 1 service. And so it's been that changed everything for me to see this this model move from not just providing you with an open source software, but also those same people providing you with guidance and prescriptive management in ways that helps everybody be successful together, right? In terms of support and management and opinionated deployment. Every day, there is more of that experience around that continuous integration, continuous delivery, and all of those processes that go into that. But there's a unique kind of balance that goes into that as well. Like, it's great that we can recompile. I can stand up a server and recompile on every change, but man, does that get expensive, right? I mean,
that is true.
Yeah. So there's a lot of fun and interesting ways of identifying give and take, right? I think we saw that with the GNOME project. GNOME project they got a fair amount of credit from Google, and Google gave them the ability to run their continuous integration, continuous deployment, and they in 1 quarter consumed all of that credit, right? just finding a way to, and so you want to make sure that you find that balance and the opportunities to really say this is a critical component, and we don't just have to do the unit test. We can go ahead and do the full compile, or we can do we can build the whole project and do our behavioral tests or whatever, and kind of making that decision, I think, is a really interesting one that people have to bend.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting to see the number of options and how this has evolved over the years. And I'm interested to see what you're seeing, from your partners and vendors. What's new? What are they excited about? What are they looking forward to over the next few years?
I think the first thing that we're all looking forward to, right, is an evolution of this container space, right? What does it look like? How do we make this work for the long haul? And then what's the future of computing, right? Like we don't, is it serverless? Is it, is it Kubernetes? Is it a, scalable system as yet to be determined? What does it look like? Do we have the right kind of resource sharing model? What does storage look like? I mean, I'm excited personally. I'm excited about the concepts of around NVMe reservations and how that might work. Another thing that I'm really excited about is power management, right? So I don't know if you've looked at this, but in a generally like in a server world, there's no reason to think that you're going to put your server to sleep, right? I mean, who wants to put their server to sleep?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to stay up.
Right, but in the cloud, on the cloud, or we're in these opportunistic compute models, right? Lots of things don't necessarily have to stay awake while you're you're using them. You can go with more advanced power management, and so we see that with customers who want to maintain, or I see it in Amazon, and I work on it in the context of Fedora, but power management, where they suspend a system to a swap file on an instance, right? And then when they need it back, like I said, in an opportunistic way, let's say the cost, we have on Amazon, we have Spot instances. I'll use that as an example. In Spot, we look at utilization just generally, and we determine a price, and that price can fluctuate. And so if you could hibernate a system and then just wake it back up to do whatever opportunistic work you have, like transcoding or base compiling or whatever, to do that work only when there's a cheaper price to do it, right? But making that happen means that you have to convince other people to come with you, right?
True. Yeah.
So from a general standpoint, server doesn't require this, right? You really need some sort of cloud management system that you're looking at that says, okay, I will get, because I have this ability on KVM, I can use the ACPI controls to shut this down and bring it back up when I think it's important, regardless of what the underlying model is or the reasoning behind it. You still have this ability to make it happen. And I think that those are, those finding that model exists. Now finding the right workloads for that starts to be an interesting, that's kind of the interesting thing right now. So what does that look like? It's, I've seen, Monte Carlo style parallel computing, right? Embarrassingly parallel computing that can benefit from this on a lot of occasions, reporting structures of that sort. And so now it's kind of exciting to think about next generation. How are we as open source contributors going to make that model functional for people who want to use it at a higher level, at an application layer?
Okay. So, I mean, those are some of the things you're looking forward to. Is there a project that you're really involved in externally, maybe an open source thing that you're like going, that is a cool project, everybody should go check that out?
Well, I mean, so I'm biased in the sense that I've spent the last 15 years working on the Fedora project.
It's okay. It's okay. You can be biased. So go ahead and be biased.
Sure. So, I mean, so I'll say two things there that I have very much enjoyed being part of Fedora, from being just an ambassador to being an active contributor to now helping to run the Fedora Cloud SIG. And from all of those generations, all those permutations, I've had an excellent experience, lots of guidance, great mentors. I don't know if you know Neil Gompa, but Neil spends a lot of time working across multiple projects. I mean, he works on OpenSUSE, he works on I think he's on the council there, and then across Fedora and on Btrfs. He's done a lot of work on Btrfs, and and we just adopted that in Fedora Cloud, by the way. Fedora 35 is coming out here pretty soon, and it'll have ButterFS in it. So pretty excited about that. That was an interesting decision too. But yeah, I'm excited about Fedora in that sense. I love what Matthew Miller has done as the Fedora project lead, and the way he's kind of been he's been the glue. Creating the position of FCake was like a great thing, right? Making a coordinator for the project, someone who could help us with events and whatnot, and Flock, whether it's virtual or in person, has been for many years now a great experience for me, and always an adventure and an opportunity to learn a lot more about packaging and program management and just development in general.
So where are you most active in that project?
I'm most active in Fedora Cloud, right? So I spend
what component of it?
So I spend my time working on the project leadership. So coordinating the meetings and working with people on the projects there, and then have done a lot of the work, or kind of spearheaded a lot of work that was done here in the short term with other people like Chris Murphy and Neil Gompa on getting ButterFS into our working group. And we did that for a couple of reasons. So one is that in cloud environments, usually you have a single disk, right, that does things. And then if you have data, you put the data on some sort of a different kind of or an additional device, right? So however you carve up that block storage, you tend to use a smaller root device, and then to have these external devices. We found that in areas like CIS hardening and things like that, we still have the same rules, right? So removing the executable bit from /temp, all these things that are very difficult to do when you have a single partition. But ButterFS allows you to have these subvolumes, and the subvolumes can be presented with a lot of these same traits. And so we thought this would be a great opportunity for us to experiment and see how far we can get working with what is effectively the more modern of file systems. And this wasn't a good fit for server in Fedora server at the same time, because ButterFS doesn't have some of the lower level RAIDs, RAID 5, RAID 6. Those don't really work effectively on ButterFS today. But for the most part, there's no reason to have those in a hyperscaler environment. And so we decided that this was a great fit for cloud, and started to put that together. So we put together a proposal. We found that there wasn't a whole lot of pushback in terms of the base Fedora, or the cloud image itself. On the front of the container, there is still a fair amount of work to be done to support the overlay model on ButterFS. So we're not there for the container. Containers don't have a ButterFS base, but for all of the component parts for cloud, that was something that we thought was pretty exciting and made it possible for us to do some things that we had not been able to do before in terms of.
And ButterFS has been in development since 2006, 7. Right?
That sounds right.
It's been a while.
Yeah, I feel like it's mature enough, and we're ready. It's been in the workstation for a couple of releases now. I don't feel like we're steady state in terms of Fedora. This was an opportunity for us to realign with the workstation components and to kind of pave the way, I think, for some of the other additions that are out there.
Why do you think it took so long to adopt?
There are first off, XFS. Come on, we're using ext4 in the base images, but Red Hat really has a lot of, as a sponsor of the project. they have a lot of vested interest in ensuring that the work that they've done on XFS is continues to be successful. And I'm not knocking them for it. I think that's it's important work. And from the enterprise perspective, long-standing file systems and long-standing support are a great thing. But it is definitely long in the tooth. Like I said, I'm just experimental since 1968, right? So, but Btrfs brings us a lot of things that I think are a more modern kind of functionality that is super helpful for us in the cloud today, and that was the exciting part for us. Snapshotting volumes, being able to take what's running on one server and then snapshot that to the root volume of another server that or another server instance, right? That was a big deal for us, right? Being able to make those changes very, very quickly and very dramatically. So I can share a root volume from one stopped instance and then use the snap from another to populate the same content to a different instance. And that allows me to do things like to have a fast model for modifying billing codes or things like that, where there's some sort of sticky metadata in the volume and the instance itself. And it doesn't seem like I'm speaking about it kind of abstractly, but it doesn't seem like a big deal until you run into this and you have to do this on hundreds of volumes. It becomes much easier with Btrfs than it is with anything else that you would possibly, than we would be using. Anything else, we'd have to be doing this at a block level replication layer much faster, right? You'd end up with DRBD in between instances and have some sort of major failover. It'd be a big deal.
So it's an interesting change, right? Because EXT4 has been around forever as well.
As long as Tetsu.
Yeah. So that is an interesting. Now, as and I'll bring up a point, and you can say if you want to talk about it or not. Like the change with CentOS, did you see any movement for people starting to look at Fedora as more of a server workload?
Well, that's an interesting. It's interesting that you bring that up. I like talking about CentOS and CentOS Stream.
Was that sarcasm or was that a real? You love talking about
it? I really like talking about it. I think it's very interesting. I was not one of those people who had an instant negative reaction to it because I had spent so much time with the HPC community, and the HPC community says these great things. They say, well, we want to run on CentOS. Great. Why you want to run on CentOS? Well, because it's stable. Okay, that's great. It is stable. You're right. And from a cloud perspective, so remember, I'm looking at it from a cloud perspective, right? I don't have any hardware today. I have been in the hardware world, but today I don't have any, except for what Amazon makes, right? So now they'd say, okay, great, we want stable. And I'm like, okay, great. So here's a kernel that's been tested, and then they'd say, yeah, but it doesn't have the ENA driver we want. Okay, great. So you're going to break that kernel so that you can have the ENA driver that you want. Now, whatever QA happened at Red Hat, whatever QA happened during the CI process for CentOS, all that's gone, right? Because you just made this modification to the kernel. It's tainted now. Okay, now that's great, but now what do you want? Oh, well, we need this additional version. We need the latest version of libfabrics. Oh, okay, that's great. Now we definitely are into uncharted territory. And while we're pushing all those changes, we know these things are coming, right? The ENA team knows that they're pushing into mainline first, right? So we see the changes in the kernel. They know they're there, but they're taking them from out a tree. And so here I am, a guy who's spending most of my time talking to these high performance computing customers about how they can get the kernel broken, and really we're pushing those same changes into Red Hat at the very same time, right? So 6 weeks later, with CentOS Stream, the concept is, 6 weeks out, it'll take about 6 weeks for QA. So we push these changes into Red Hat because we have this relationship, or AWS has this relationship with Red Hat, and we're constantly, working with we have project owners at Red Hat, we have project owners on the AWS side, and then we're pushing them together so that they can talk about things and make real change. And 6 weeks later, it's going to land in CentOS Stream, which means that if we have Stream, these people who are asking me for to make these modifications to CentOS because it's stable, right, suddenly have a stable CentOS to use, right? So CentOS Stream gives them those latest changes, roughly 6 weeks later, because they've been through the regression testing and they've been through kernel testing and they've been through QA, right? So we know they work. And Red Hat's not testing, they're not just testing on their own hardware, they're testing on the Amazon hardware as well, right? Make sure they have every opportunity to do that. So we have this constant conversation happening around Red Hat. That Red Hat conversation lands in Stream, then it really is stable. It lands in the next point release of Red Hat. Now they've got this whole cycle where they know that they have stability for the long-term support on Red Hat. The CentOS experience the CentOS Stream experience benefited from the QA process that we would normally have for a Red Hat point release. And they can use that the whole time. So I think that the process and the progress has been better based on that. Right now, there's no reason for me to ask a customer to recompile a driver. There's no reason for them to have to go and find the latest version of the RDMA core because it's in the CentOS version based on our collaborative work based on the collaborative work between Amazon and Red Hat, right? So I see this as being incredibly beneficial. I understand that a lot of people saw this and they said, oh, well, it's going to go to Fedora, to CentOS, to Red Hat. And it sounds like it got excited outside.
That's okay.
Okay. So so from the perspective of what are we working with today? Well, we're working with the latest tested kernel on the CentOS stuff. And then if we want something that's more stable, we've got Red Hat. Now, I also am was fast friends with Lee Hennings and Greg Kurtzer when they started working on Rocky. And we at Amazon, I had the great fortune of being able to support them, pretty much immediately from their conception, and work with the Cloud Linux guys and worked on the Alma Linux with the Alma Linux team and loved working with them. And all of their products are perfectly functional on AWS.
Yeah, and I mean, from an AWS standpoint, I've said this. This is more of just a CentOS, not CentOS.
Well, I kind of have to. It's hard for me to talk about it out of context.
Yeah, but it is an interesting thing because you mentioned a use case that many people don't think about because they don't necessarily see that. Like the vast majority of CentOS users that I've known and that we work with, they're not compiling their own kernel extensions. They're not adding things. It's like the reason they're using CentOS, let's be honest, is they don't want to pay Red Hat for Red Hat Linux.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't need to say that. I say that because that's my customers that I'm talking to. That's what they're like. They're like, oh yeah, we don't want to pay for Red Hat Linux, but we want everything that Red Hat Linux offers. And I think that
amazing people work on CentOS, right?
Yeah, yeah. And that's great. And I think it gets back to in the open source space. We've done some surveys over the years, and it's like a minimum of 2/3 of those who are running open source are predisposed to never pay for, something in the open source space that they can get for free. I mean, right. And that's cool, right? Because that's part of the cool factor of, being able to get things in the, in the Linux space or in the, open source space. And, they can grab these things, they can make it work. And you know what, more power to them if they can run it in production on their own.
I mean, that's not how I want to run my production database. Sorry, just end the story.
Hey, I get you. I get you. I get you. I'm not saying I condone it.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that's a common thing. And I think that's why a lot of the push around, or the concern around that switch to stream came up as you've got a really large set of users using CentOS that's basically just using it because it's Red Hat Enterprise Linux without the Red Hat Enterprise Linux name. And then all of a sudden it changes, and then that disrupts what they expected. But it's interesting to hear from you. Like, you've got these people who are like, they want CentOS because it's stable, but then they want this other stuff, which is a little bit of a different space that I'm used to, because, like I said, my customers are a little different. Now, it's interesting. Now you mentioned that you don't want to run stuff in production without having some sort of support or safety net, which is where most large enterprises are. But it's super interesting. I found that most of the companies that choose self-support, they choose self-support for one or two people who are at that company. And then when those people leave, like the people coming in, they're like, why did we do this? And then they change technologies, they change everything. They end up with support, right? And there's a cycle, right? It's a very independent choice that really boils down to individual contributors on which technologies in a lot of cases, and whether they're willing to pay, and whether they want support or not support. It's very interesting.
It is. I mean, and you heard me, say that some of my earliest projects were my earliest large projects were built on things like, the Linux in Schools project. I mean, they weren't built on something that was, but of course, when I built those servers ran Red Hat, right? I mean, they were.
Well, but at the time, was there even Red Hat Enterprise Linux, or did you go get it on 30 floppy disks like everyone else did, or the CD in the back?
This was on CDs, yeah.
Oh, like I said, the back of the magazine.
Yeah. Well, no, it was it had. I had the XFS overlay that I'd created myself, right? Because there wasn't such a thing at that point. XFS was. This is like 7.2, right? Talking about yesterday.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I learned on Slackware, by the way. So
no, it's great. I feel like there's a lot of places there where we all learned, we all grew our abilities on Linux. I mean, Linux really was I was working on, don't hold this against me, but most of my work was done on SCO Unix before. Yeah.
I got to hang up.
Right. But before I got into Red Hat while, SCO was a great experience for being able to work on multiple systems to support, hundreds of terminals and things like that. For me, when the only other alternative for small business was Windows. But every time I would call in, this is my experience, right? Is that for proprietary software like that, you call in for support because you had some sort of a kernel bug. You'd pay somebody $700 so they'd talk to you about the fact that you had a kernel bug. And then the ultimate answer would be, yes, there is a kernel bug.
Yeah. I get
it. And so I feel like, there in the old, in the early days, it was a great thing. We were learning. But for that business, I mean, I had Red Hat support, right? There was no question about it. Like if something went wrong, I wasn't going to rely on myself and the one other guy who really had a day job, right? To be there when they really needed, they needed to know what had to go right, we wanted that support. We wanted the sense certainty that we were going to be able to help them.
No, I get it. I mean, Percona, where I work, that's how we make our money, is on the support too. So, like,
right.
I mean, like we have a vested interest as well. But it is an interesting thing because so many. I mean, and you have the freedom in open source, and that's the great thing is it's about enabling those choices.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is, and it's one of the things that I think is interesting is that we do have choice, and we have choice on where we get that support. I mean, there's great opportunity out there to be an open source supporter and to make a good living at it, right? I mean, that is the open source way is to take advantage of the opportunities that are provided by people using the software and your expertise. Yeah. So, but there, it's interesting. There are always places where there are lots of lessons to be learned about this. And I think that knee-jerk reaction was one of the lessons that we really needed to learn, which is that CentOS Stream wasn't a direct descendant of Fedora, right? It was a collaborative effort around enterprise Linux that then was provided in a way that was a foot forward for what would be released as a stable release a little bit later, right?
And I mean, sometimes that's just marketing, right? I mean, it's how you position it or market it or like articulate the value of it. And I think in the open source space, especially where passions run high, it's so important to, be able to articulate, tell the story and, convey what you're trying to do. And sometimes as folks working on the back end, we sometimes overlook that or minimize that conversation or that
minimize
story.
Is a really good way. Yeah, that is a something that we have to be very careful about, right, in our world, because their opinions do run high and there are many of them and they don't converge necessarily. And one of I've seen this tactic from senior leadership where someone has a really strong idea, but they don't know how to present it well, right? They don't know how to articulate it. And we need to be there for each other to help bootstrap those concepts and to listen. I think, and this is I got from Plato, actually, but to listen to what I mean, not what I say.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, David, thank you for stopping by and chatting with me about, some of the things going on in your group and also in the Fedora space. It was a pleasure to sit down and catch up and learn a little bit about your background and stuff. But I do appreciate you coming on.
Matt, this has been spectacular, right? I mean, I've really enjoyed having the chat. I hope we get to do it again.
Oh yeah, anytime. Yeah. If people wanted to chat with you or reach out in community and just say hi, where's the best way for them to do that?
I'm Davdunk everywhere. DAVDUNC. So hit me up on Twitter. Yeah, love to talk to you. Counter Social, Mastodon, Davdunk everywhere.
Hey. All right, awesome.
Yeah.
All right, David. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
Wow, what a great episode that was. We really appreciate you coming and checking it out. We hope that you love open source as much as we do. If you like this video, go ahead and subscribe to us on the YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And of course, tune in to next week's episode. We really appreciate you coming and talking open source with us.